The wind carried no promises across the Nebraska grasslands that October evening, only the bitter scent of coming winter and the endless whisper of prairie grass bending to its will. Samuel Hartwell stood on his porch, weathered hands gripping a tin cup of cold coffee, watching the sun bleed orange across the horizon. 57 years on this earth, 23 of them on this God-forsaken patch of land, and still the sunset could make him pause. But only for a moment. The ranch stretched out before him, 280 acres of stubborn grass, a handful of cattle, and buildings that creaked their age with every gust. The barn, once painted red, now wore the grey patina of abandonment. Everything needed mending, but Samuel's hands weren't what they used to be, and his heart had grown heavy with the weight of doing everything alone. He hadn't spoken to another human being in 4 days. The isolation hadn't always felt like a burden. When Martha was alive, this place had hummed with life, her laughter echoing from the kitchen, her presence filling the spaces between words. But Martha had been gone 6 years now, claimed by fever, and Samuel had let the silence settle around him like dust. He drained the cold coffee and turned toward the house, his boots hollow on weathered boards. Inside, the oil lamp cast dancing shadows on walls that held too many memories and not enough hope. Samuel moved through his evening routine mechanically. Checked the stove, banked the fire, wind Martha's old clock. He was reaching for the lamp when he heard it, a soft thud from the direction of the barn. He paused, listening. The cattle were settled, and he'd secured the barn doors hours ago, but there it was again, fainter this time, like something falling. Samuel pulled his coat from the peg and stepped into the October night. His breath formed small clouds in the crystalline air. Above, stars pricked the darkness like scattered diamonds. He walked carefully across the yard toward the barn. The doors were still secured, but something felt wrong. On the barn's side, he noticed footprints in the frost, small, bare feet that couldn't belong to any neighbors. The tracks led from the tree line directly to his barn. His heart began to pound, not from fear, but from something more complex. Someone was here, someone who needed shelter badly enough to risk trespassing. He lifted the latch slowly, easing the door open. Inside, the barn held familiar scents of hay and leather, but underneath lay something else, the metallic smell of cold and exhaustion. "I know you're in here," Samuel said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." A rustling from the corner where he stored winter hay. There, curled against feed sacks like a wounded animal, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 12 or 13, his dark hair hanging in lank strands around a face that belonged to the Lakota people who sometimes passed through this territory. His clothes were little more than rags, worn buckskin pants, and a thin shirt that offered no protection against October's teeth. His lips were blue with cold, his breathing shallow and rapid. Samuel knelt beside him, close enough to see the sharp angles of hunger in the boy's face, the way his small frame shook with each labored breath. This wasn't just cold. This was starvation, exhaustion, and something deeper, something that spoke of loss and desperate flight. "Easy, son," Samuel whispered, though the boy's eyes remained closed. "You're safe now." The boy stirred at the sound of his voice, dark eyes fluttering open and immediately going wide with fear. He tried to scramble backward but had no strength left, could only watch as this strange white man with graying hair and worried eyes leaned closer. "Shh," Samuel said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're hurt. Cold. When did you last eat?" The boy's mouth moved, but no sound came out. His eyes darted toward the barn door, calculating escape routes his body couldn't possibly manage. Samuel studied the young face and saw something that made his chest tighten, the same look Martha used to get when storms threatened, when forces beyond their control gathered on the horizon. This boy was running from something. "Can you understand me?" Samuel asked gently. The boy's slight nod confirmed his suspicions. "Good. I'm going to help you, but first I need to get you warm and get some food in you." Together they made their way to the house. Inside, Samuel settled the boy into Martha's old rocking chair by the stove, wrapping him in the heaviest quilt he could find. "Tea first," Samuel said. "Something warm, then we'll see about solid food." As he moved around the kitchen, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Purpose. The boy watched with eyes that held depths Samuel couldn't fathom. Hunger, but also something older. A wariness born of understanding that kindness often came with prices. "What's your name, son?" Samuel asked as he poured hot tea into a cracked mug. The boy's lips moved silently, then in halting English, Ayan, Ayan, that's a good name. I'm Samuel. He handed over the mug. Drink slowly now. As Ayan sipped the tea, color returned to his face. Samuel cut thick slices of bread, buttered them generously, and placed them within reach. Eat what you can. There's plenty more. The boy looked at the food as if he couldn't believe it was real. His first bite was hesitant, but hunger quickly overcame caution. Outside, the wind howled around the eaves like something seeking entry. Samuel glanced toward the door, then at the boy who had somehow found his way to this forgotten corner of the world. Tomorrow would bring questions that needed answers. Tonight there was only warmth, food, and the strange comfort of no longer being alone with the silence. Samuel woke to the sound of silence, but not the familiar empty silence that had become his constant companion. This was different, full of potential. For a moment, lying in the pre-dawn darkness, he couldn't place what had changed. Then memory returned. The boy. He dressed quickly, his movements quieter than usual. The house felt different with another soul sharing its spaces, warmer despite the October chill. In the kitchen, Samuel found Ayan exactly where he'd left him, curled in Martha's rocking chair, the heavy quilt pulled to his chin. The boy's breathing was steady and deep, the sleep of someone who had finally found safety. Samuel moved carefully around the kitchen, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to brew. Outside, frost transformed every blade of grass into crystal. This was Samuel's time, always had been, even when Martha would tease him about greeting the dawn like an old rooster. The coffee's aroma filled the kitchen, and Samuel was surprised when it stirred something like contentment. When had he last looked forward to morning? Morning. The voice was soft, cautious. Samuel turned to find Ayan sitting up, dark eyes alert, but no longer filled with desperate fear. Sleep and warmth had returned some color to the boy's face. Morning, son. How'd you sleep? Good. Thank you. Coffee's almost ready. You drink coffee. The boy shook his head. Water? Samuel filled a mug from the pump, noting how Ayan's eyes followed his every movement, still watching, still ready to run. Trust was like any wild thing. It couldn't be forced, only earned. You hungry? Samuel asked. A small nod. Samuel rose and began pulling together breakfast. Eggs, bacon, more of the bread that had disappeared so quickly the night before. As he cooked, he could feel Ayan watching him with an intensity that spoke of someone who had learned to read people quickly. Where are you from, Ayan? Samuel asked as he cracked eggs into the skillet. The boy was quiet for so long that Samuel thought he wouldn't answer. Then, north. Many days walking. What were you running from? Soldiers. They came to our camp. Said we had to go to the reservation. My grandmother was too old to make the journey. She told me to run to find my uncle's people, but I got lost. Samuel's hands stilled. The forced relocations were common knowledge. He'd heard the stories but never seen the human cost up close. Your uncle, where is he? South. I think south. But I don't know how far. Samuel plated the food and set it before Ayan. Eat up. We'll figure something out. They ate in comfortable silence. Samuel found himself studying the boy's face, seeing past the hunger and exhaustion to something else, intelligence, determination, and a quiet strength that reminded him of Martha. Your grandmother, Samuel said carefully. What happened to her? Ayan's fork paused. She stayed behind, said the earth there held her mother's bones and her mother's mother, said some things are worth staying for, even when staying means... He didn't finish, but Samuel understood. The boy had lost more than his family, he'd lost his whole world. I'm sorry, son. The sunrise was beginning to paint the horizon gold when Samuel rose to clear the dishes. I've got chores to do, Samuel said. You're welcome to stay inside where it's warm, or... I can help. It's hard work and cold. I'm not afraid of work or cold. There was quiet pride in Ayan's voice that Samuel recognized and respected. He nodded, finding some smaller work clothes that would keep the boy warm. Together they stepped out into the frost-covered morning. Samuel found himself matching his pace to Ayan's shorter stride as they moved hay and filled water troughs. The boy worked with quiet efficiency, and Samuel found himself explaining more than necessary. About the cattle, about ranch life, about the seasons. It felt good to have someone to talk to. They were heading back toward the house when Samuel saw it. At first it was just a feeling, that sense of being watched. He paused, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing unusual. What is it? Ayan asked. Nothing. Thought I saw... Samuel shook his head. Probably just a deer. But as they approached the barn, the feeling grew stronger. Samuel stopped, his eyes moving across the distant trees, and then he saw them. Figures standing among the trees, so still they might have been part of the forest itself. One, then another, then more, until Samuel realized the entire tree line was dotted with silent watchers. Native people, dressed traditionally despite the cold, standing with an almost supernatural patience. "Ayan," Samuel said quietly. The boy looked where Samuel was pointing, and his whole body went rigid. "No, they found me." "Who are they?" "My people. My grandfather's people." Ayan's voice was tight with fear and resignation. "They came for me." Samuel counted them. 20, maybe 25 figures spread along the tree line like sentinels. They held no weapons, made no threatening gestures. They simply stood and watched. "Are you in trouble with them?" "I don't know. I was supposed to go to the reservation with everyone else. When I ran—" He swallowed hard. "They must think I brought shame to our family." Samuel looked down at the boy, seeing the fear in his dark eyes, and something protective stirred in his chest. "They're not coming any closer," Samuel observed. "They're just watching." Indeed, the figures remained perfectly still, as if waiting for something. "What do they want, Ayan?" The boy shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But I never believed—" He trailed off, staring at the silent watchers. "They've been out there all night," Samuel said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. "Haven't they?" Ayan nodded slowly. "They followed me, but they didn't stop me from coming to you. They could have. They're better trackers than I'll ever be. They let me reach your barn." "Why?" "Maybe." Ayan's voice was thoughtful, uncertain. "Maybe they wanted to see what you would do." Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning. He looked again at the silent figures, at their perfect stillness, their patient watching. What kind of test was this? And had he passed or failed? The sun climbed higher, painting the frost-covered world in gold. The cattle continued their routine, oblivious to the watchers, but Samuel and Ayan remained frozen, caught between worlds, waiting for something neither fully understood. "What happens now?" Samuel asked quietly. "Now," Ayan whispered, "we wait. The elders will decide." And in the growing light of morning, with the silent watchers keeping their eternal vigil, Samuel began to understand that his simple act of kindness had set in motion something far greater than he could have imagined. The morning stretched into afternoon, and still the watchers remained. Samuel tried to go about his usual tasks, but found himself constantly glancing toward the tree line, where the silent figures maintained their vigil. Ayan stayed close to his side, no longer the confident helper of the morning, but a boy caught between worlds, uncertain which one would claim him. They were mending a section of fence when the change came. Not a sound or movement from the watchers, something subtler. A shift in the quality of waiting, as if the very air had made a decision. "They're moving," Ayan whispered. Samuel looked up to see 3 figures detaching themselves from the tree line. Not the young warriors he might have expected, but elders. 2 men and 1 woman, their faces weathered by decades of prairie sun and winter winds. They walked with the deliberate pace of those who had earned the right to move without haste, who carried the weight of their people's wisdom in every step. "Should I get my rifle?" Samuel asked quietly, though he made no move toward the house. "No." Ayan's voice was firm, despite his fear. "That would be wrong. They come in peace, or they would have come with the sunrise." The 3 elders stopped 20 paces from Samuel and Ayan, close enough to speak without shouting, but far enough to show respect for boundaries. The woman stepped forward slightly, clearly the leader of this delegation. Her grey hair was braided with beads that caught the afternoon light, and her dark eyes held depths that spoke of storms weathered and children raised. She spoke in Lakota, her voice carrying with authority. Ayan straightened, responding in the same language, his words careful and formal. Samuel stood silent, understanding none of the words, but reading the tension in both voices. This was ceremony, something far more important than simple conversation. After several minutes, the elder woman switched to English, her accent heavy but clear. "You are Samuel Hartwell. I am Winona, grandmother to many, keeper of our stories. These are Joseph and Thomas." She gestured to the men flanking her. "That we have come to speak of the boy. Ayan is welcome here as long as he needs shelter," Samuel said carefully. "Is he? You know what his people have suffered. Yet you opened your door to him in the darkness. Why?" Samuel glanced at Ayan, seeing the boy's rigid posture. He was cold and hungry, That's reason enough. Many would not agree. Many of your people would see only a thief in the night, yet you fed him from your own table. Why? The answer came from a place deeper than thought. Because he's a child. Because my wife always said that kindness was the only currency that multiplied when you spent it. And because when I looked at him, I didn't see Lakota or white or any of that. I just saw a scared boy who needed help. Winona was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke to Ayan in their shared language. The boy's response was longer, and Samuel caught his own name several times. He tells us you gave him not only food, but work, Winona said. That you treated him as family. He's a good worker. And when you saw us watching, 25 warriors and elders in your tree line, what did you think? I thought you'd come for him. I thought maybe he was in trouble. And yet you did not send him away. You did not offer him up to save yourself. He's under my protection now. The words came out with force. That means something. Winona's stern expression softened slightly. She spoke again to Ayan, then turned back to Samuel. The boy tells us his grandmother spoke of you before her passing, Winona said. She said there was a white man who lived alone at the edge of the world, one whose heart had not been hardened. She said this man would be known by his actions. Samuel felt the ground shift. His grandmother knew of me? She knew many things. She was a seer, a keeper of wisdom. Before the soldiers came, she told Ayan that if he became lost, he should seek out the lonely rancher at the edge of nowhere. She said the forest would whisper which path to take. The words hit Samuel hard. She planned this. She foresaw it. She saw a time when her grandson would need the kindness of strangers, when the old ways would meet the new. She saw a test, and a choice that would matter more than you know. What kind of test? The test of bread and kindness, Winona said. The test of whether mercy still lives in a world grown hard with fear. You were tested, Samuel Hartwell, and you did not know it. We have been watching you for 2 days, seeing how you would choose when no one was looking but the sky. You fed him. You gave him warmth and work and dignity, and when you saw us watching, you placed yourself between the boy and what you believed was danger. You chose his welfare over your own safety. Samuel felt heat rise in his cheeks. I didn't do anything special. No, not any person would have done this. Not in these times with the fear that has grown between our peoples. You chose to see a child in need rather than an enemy. That is not common. The other 2 elders stepped forward. Joseph spoke, his English accented but clear. The boy's grandmother was my sister. She made us promise to watch over her grandson, to see that he found his path. She said his path would lead through the kindness of strangers, and that this kindness would be a bridge between worlds. We could have taken him at any time, Thomas added, but his grandmother's vision required that he make this journey, that he find you, and that you make your choice freely. And if I had turned him away? Samuel asked. Then the bridge would have remained unbuilt, Winona said simply, and the boy would have learned that there is no kindness left in the world for his people. Samuel looked at Ayan, seeing the boy in an entirely new light. Not just a refugee from forced relocation, but a bridge, a test of whether understanding was still possible between 2 worlds that had grown so far apart. What happens now? Samuel asked. Winona smiled for the first time, transforming her weathered face. Now we honor the bridge that has been built. The boy will stay with you through the winter, if you will have him. He will learn your ways, as you learn some of ours. And when spring comes, he will choose his path, to go south to find his uncle's people, or to return to us, or to stay here in the place between worlds. And you're all right with that? With him staying with me? His grandmother trusted her vision. We trust her wisdom, and we trust what we have seen in you, Samuel Hartwell. Winona paused, looking out over the ranch, the cattle, the endless grassland beyond. This land has known much sorrow, much anger between your people and mine. Perhaps it is time for it to know something else. Perhaps it is time for healing. She turned to Ayan then, speaking to him in their shared language. The boy responded, his voice steady and sure. When they finished, Winona nodded approvingly. The boy says he would like to stay to learn your ways of working the land. He says you have already begun to teach him that there is honor in honest work, regardless of the color of one's skin. Samuel felt something loosen in his chest, a tightness he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. He's a good student, and... He paused, surprised by the emotion in his voice. And it's been good to have him here. This place has been too quiet for too long. The 3 elders exchanged glances. some silent communication passing between them. Then Winona reached into a pouch at her side and withdrew something, a small leather bag tied with sinew. "A gift," she said, pressing it into Samuel's hands. "Seeds from his grandmother's garden. She grew corn and squash and beans using methods passed down through generations. Plant them in the spring, and remember that some bridges are built not just between people, but between the land and those who tend it." Samuel accepted the gift with reverence, understanding its significance even if he couldn't articulate it. "Thank you. I'll take good care of them, and of him. We know you will." His grandmother saw truly. Winona stepped back, preparing to leave. "We will return when the snows melt to see how the bridge has grown. Until then, you have our trust and our gratitude." The three elders began walking back toward the tree line, their pace as measured and dignified as their approach had been. Samuel and Ayan stood watching until they disappeared among the trees, and then for several minutes more, as the silent watchers gradually melted away, leaving the forest empty and ordinary once again. "Did you know," Samuel asked finally, "about your grandmother's vision?" Ayan shook his head. "Not all of it. She told me to trust the forest to show me the path, but I thought she meant finding my uncle. I didn't know about this. And now that you do know, are you all right with staying?" The boy looked up at him, and Samuel saw something in his dark eyes that hadn't been there before. Not just trust, but belonging. "I'd like to stay, if you'll have me." Samuel nodded, surprised by how much the answer mattered to him. "I'd like that too, son. I'd like that very much." As they walked back toward the house, the afternoon sun painting long shadows across the frost-covered ground, Samuel realized that something fundamental had changed, not just in the boy's situation, but in his own. The silence that had been his companion for so many years was gone, replaced by something richer and more complex. He was no longer alone, and for the first time in 6 years, that felt exactly right. Winter came to the Nebraska plains, with the fury of something ancient and untamed, bringing blizzards that howled for days and temperatures that could kill a man caught unprepared. But inside Samuel's small house, warmth prevailed, not just from the wood stove, but from something deeper. Ayan proved himself more than capable of holding his own through the brutal months. He learned to read the sky for coming storms, to bank fires that would burn through the night, to care for cattle when the snow piled higher than fence posts. In return, he taught Samuel things the older man had never imagined: how to track animals by signs invisible to untrained eyes, how to find direction using stars Samuel had looked at for decades without truly seeing, how to listen to silence until it spoke. They developed their own rhythm, their own language that went beyond words. In the evenings, by lamplight, Samuel would tell stories of Martha, of the early days on the ranch, of dreams built and lost and found again. Ayan would share memories of his grandmother, tales of his people that stretched back to times when the buffalo darkened the plains like moving thunder. "She used to say the land remembers everything," Ayan said one February night as wind rattled the windows. "Every footstep, every tear, every act of kindness. She said someday all of it would matter." Samuel looked up from the harness he was mending. "Sounds like a wise woman." She was. Even at the end, when the soldiers came, she wasn't afraid. She said her body might leave, but her spirit would stay in the land she loved. "That's why she knew you would help me, because the land had already told her who you were." By March, when the worst of winter began to loosen its grip, Samuel realized he could no longer imagine the ranch without Ayan's presence. The boy had grown taller, stronger, his face losing some of its boyish softness. More importantly, he had grown into himself, confident in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with finding his place in the world. The morning Samuel decided it was time to plant the seeds, he found Ayan already outside, studying the small patch of earth behind the house where Martha used to grow vegetables. "The ground's ready," Ayan said without looking up. "Grandmother always said you could feel it in the earth when it was time." Samuel knelt beside him, running the dark soil through his fingers. It was rich, warmed by the strengthening sun, full of potential. Together they worked the patch, preparing it according to methods Ayan remembered from watching his grandmother. 3 sisters, Ayan explained, as they created small mounds in the traditional pattern. Corn, beans, squash. They help each other grow. The corn gives the beans something to climb. The beans give the soil what the corn needs, and the squash keeps the weeds away with its big leaves. Samuel watched the boy's hands as he carefully placed each seed, murmuring words in Lakota under his breath. Prayers, Samuel realized, or blessings. There was something sacred in the act, something that connected them not just to the land, but to all the generations who had planted and hoped before them. They had just finished when Samuel spotted movement at the tree line. 3 familiar figures emerged from the forest, Winona, Joseph, and Thomas, returning as promised when the snows melted. "They're early," Ayan said, brushing dirt from his hands. "Maybe they knew it was planting day," Samuel replied, surprised by how glad he was to see them. The elders approached with the same dignified pace as before, but this time there was something different in their bearing. Less judgment, more curiosity. Winona's eyes took in the freshly planted garden, the improvements Samuel and Ayan had made to the ranch over the winter, the easy way the two stood together. "The boy has grown," she observed. "We both have," Samuel said, and meant it. Winona smiled. "Good. Growth is the purpose of all seasons, even the hard ones." She looked at Ayan. "Your grandmother's seeds are planted." "Yes, Grandmother Winona, in the traditional way, with the proper prayers." "And your heart? Is it also planted, or does it still wander?" Ayan glanced at Samuel, then back at the elder woman. "My heart has found its place, but I want to ask something of you. Of all the elders." Winona raised an eyebrow. "Speak. I want to build something here, not just for me, but for others like me. Children caught between worlds, who need a place to learn both ways of living. I want this ranch to be that bridge Grandmother spoke of, a real place where Lakota and white children can work together, learn from each other." Samuel felt his breath catch. They had talked about this through the long winter nights, but hearing Ayan speak it aloud to the elders made it feel suddenly powerfully real. "And you, Samuel Hartwell?" Winona asked. "What do you say to this dream?" Samuel looked around his ranch, at the land that had been his refuge, his prison, his entire world for so many years. Then he looked at Ayan, at the elders, at the garden where seeds from 2 traditions were already beginning their journey toward the sun. "I say it's time this land served a bigger purpose than just keeping one old man from being lonely," he said. "I say Martha would have loved the idea. And I say I can't think of anything I'd rather spend the rest of my life building." Winona studied them both for a long moment. Then she spoke to Joseph and Thomas in rapid Lakota. Samuel caught enough of their responses to understand they were discussing practical matters, logistics, community support, the challenges they would face. Finally, Winona turned back to them. "It will not be easy. There are those among both our peoples who will resist such mixing. There are laws and fears and old hurts that run deep." "Yes," Ayan said simply, "but Grandmother always said the hardest things were usually the most worth doing." She did indeed. Winona reached into her bag and withdrew another small pouch, this one containing what looked like flower seeds. "Sunflowers," she explained. "Plant these around the edges of your learning place. They will grow tall and strong, and they will always turn their faces toward the light. Let them be a reminder of what you're building here." Samuel accepted the seeds with the same reverence he'd shown the first gift. "Thank you for trusting us with this." "Trust is earned and re-earned with each season," Winona said. "But yes, you have ours, and our support, whatever form that may take." The elders stayed until sunset, discussing practical matters and sharing a meal that blended Samuel's simple cooking with food they had brought. As darkness fell and they prepared to leave, Winona pulled Ayan aside for a private conversation. Samuel couldn't hear the words, but he saw the boy nod solemnly, then embrace the elderly woman with deep affection. "What did she say?" Samuel asked, after the elders had disappeared back into the forest. "She said Grandmother would be proud, that the bridge we're building is stronger than she ever imagined it could be." Ayan paused, looking up at the star-filled sky. "She also said that bridges don't just connect places, they connect times, past and future, what was and what could be." That night, Samuel lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, wind in the grass, cattle settling for the night, the creak of aging wood. But underneath it all he heard something new, possibility. Over the following weeks, as the planted seeds began to push their way toward the light, Samuel and Ayan threw themselves into planning their school. They would start small, just a few children to begin with, both Lakota and white, learning reading and writing alongside traditional skills like tracking, planting, and animal care. The first students arrived in late May, 2 Lakota children whose parents had heard of Winona's approval, and 3 white children from town whose parents were curious enough about the experiment to give it a try. Samuel watched Ayan work with them, patient and confident, bridging languages and worlds with the natural ease of someone who belonged fully to both. By summer's end, the three sisters' garden was flourishing, tall cornstalks reaching toward the sky, while beans spiraled around them and squash spread its broad leaves across the ground. The sunflowers Winona had given them stood like golden sentries around the edges of what they had started calling the learning field, a place where children worked and played and discovered that difference didn't have to mean division. On the anniversary of that first October night when he'd found a starving boy in his barn, Samuel stood in the same spot, watching Ayan teach a group of children how to read the evening sky. The boy had become a young man, strong and sure of his purpose. The ranch had become something neither of them could have imagined, not just a bridge between two cultures, but a place where the future was being quietly, hopefully built. Samuel thought of Martha, of how she'd always believed kindness multiplied when you spent it. He thought of an elderly Lakota woman who had trusted her vision enough to send her grandson into the unknown. He thought of seeds planted in faith, reaching always toward the light. The wind carried the sound of children's laughter across the grassland, and Samuel smiled. The silence was gone forever, replaced by something infinitely more precious, the sound of tomorrow taking root.